Hello everyone, BPie here. Today we're going to be talking about the end game experience of raiding in Classic WoW. This video is not meant to be a guide for raiding in Classic, but with Naxxramas right around the corner, I thought it would be interesting to reflect on my experience of raiding in Classic WoW. Now then, I wanted to see what other people in my guild thought about raiding in Classic WoW, so I took a little survey. The responses I received were boring, only fun when I'm drunk, low skill, high prep, world buffs are BIS, and rare loot. I would agree with most of these statements. Personally, I find the raiding experience enjoyable, for the most part. Perhaps this is because I'm a Classic WoW baby, or maybe it's just because I'm a nerd at heart. But if you are like me, and you like to quote-unquote try hard, then Classic WoW raiding takes much more time than what you set aside for the actual raid. Many of you probably already know where I might be going with this video, but there's kind of two categories I suppose I want to start talking about. First of all, we have world buffs and consumables. They both have a lot of interesting arguments associated with them, but let's go ahead and start off with consumables first. Each class has their ideal set of consumables. Oftentimes in a guild, they're required for raiding. Some classes get lucky, as in they don't benefit a lot from using consumables. Well, let's just say for other classes, they make a massive difference. Although there's some different takes on consumables in Classic WoW. A lot of times people will say, you know, the content's easy, you don't need to pop consumes, whatever. I think everyone can agree that they make the experience easier, and I would argue more enjoyable, especially during more difficult content. So let's take a look at what this process entails for my mage during a normal 3-hour raid night in the current phase of content, which is AQ40. Typically, we'd go ahead and start in AQ40, and then we'd finish off in Blackwing Lair, or we'd be doing a Binding Run and Molten Core, depending on the time. Now, without any deaths at all, I can expect to pop at least 1 flask of Supreme Power, 3 Greater Arcane Elixirs, 3 Mage Blood Potions, 6 Greater Firepower Elixirs, 6 Brilliant Wizard Oils, 10 Run Tum Tuber Surprises, 1 Spirit of Zanza, 5 Greater Nature Protection Potions, 2 Greater Fire Protection Potions, 1 or more Limited Invulnerability Potions, 6 Gordok Green Grogs, 5 Greater Frost Power Elixirs, and 1 Cerebral Cortex Compound. Okay, here's the deal. I don't always use all of these during raid nights, but after looking at my most recent raid logs, this represents a pretty reasonable amount of consumables used in just AQ. Now, the caveat here is that if you die, you lose all of your buffs, besides the flasks, of course. So sometimes it's more and sometimes it's less. It really just depends on how often you die. Let's just say nobody likes dying during a raid, considering the gold investment into consumables.
Easy.
Beware.
F.
Who just said
Shit,
that?
I spoke too soon. I spoke too soon.
Keep DPS and keep DPS and
That was Bella.
Did you go above the warlocks? Did you go above the warlocks?
The rocks at your feet.
Oh, it was not a time blast.
Hey, put dots on. Dots, priest.
8.7, 0.6, 0.5,
But I'm out of ball.
0.2, 2%.
Hit him.
500, 300,
Oh
what?
my
Dude, this guy is so fucking easy to beat.
Okay, so that's not even majority of your time and investment in preparation for a raid, depending on, again, how hard you want to quote-unquote try.
That was such uber ponage.
Everybody's favorite topic, world buffs. The controversial topic of raiding in Classic WoW has full buffs. Sorry, brother. They are necessary to make the content easier and oftentimes add a fair bit of drama when they are lost. We all know this. But for me, I just kind of consider it to be part of the Classic WoW raiding experience. Now, if you're watching this video, you probably already know what the process is that you go through in order to get these buffs. But for those of us that maybe just want a brief overview, maybe you decided to stop doing world buffs in phase 2, or maybe you are new to Classic WoW, or maybe you're like the people that I've told, hey, I have raid tonight for 3 hours.
Nelson, I need to come over and use your computer. No, I need to play World of Warcraft. Nelson!
But then I'm on 2 hours prior and I'm getting buffs, and then I have to explain to them what the process is for getting buffs in Classic WoW. So for those of us that are curious, here is my process for getting full buffs before raiding. First of all, you find an open dire maul or you can run the dungeon yourself. Can't tell you the last time that I did that. Then usually you will find a player to summon you out to Fellwood in order to get Songflower, which is an open world buff that is highly contested and also potentially leads you to open world PvP, which of course could lead you to starting the process from scratch. But more on that later. Next, you usually get summoned to either Booty Bay or Yojamba Isle in Stranglethorn Vale. This allows you to receive the Spirit of the Zandalar, which is of course a buff that Alliance and Horde can get at the same time by turning in the Heart of Akar from the last boss in Zul'Gurub. And finally, we can return back to Stormwind, or Orgrimmar, to receive the Rallying Cry of the Dragon Slayer, a buff that can only be dropped once every 7 hours by turning in the head of Onyxia or the head of Nefarian. Except, of course, people have figured out that if you have a Horde player or Alliance priest come into your major city and mind control the NPC, then you can have players on the same faction killing the NPC that you turn in the buff to, which allows you to reset the timer. It's actually quite ingenious if you think about it, whoever figured that out. And then of course, that allows you to turn in as many Onyxia heads or Nefarian heads that you might need to receive this buff on a regular basis. Oftentimes this is coordinated on Discord, or people will be continually asking throughout the day, when is Ani buff? When is heart dropping? Etc. I'm guilty of it too. This is the most common buff that people get because you can usually just be hanging out in your faction's major city and you'll end up acquiring it over time. Oh, and I almost forgot. Once a month, there's this other buff that you can get called Darkmoon Fair buff, which is arguably probably the strongest, but only once every other month is it in your faction's territory. So if you're trying to get that buff, let's say in Mulgore, if you're on Alliance, there are literally players there 24/7 briefing other players that are trying to get that buff. I stayed up way too late trying to get Darkmoon Fair buff in Mulgore one night. Let's just say I lost it 3 different times. Oh, and finally, when you are getting all these buffs, especially on a PvP server, you're logging off in between each buff that you get and then the time that you could get the next buff, just to make sure that you're not wasting any of the timers on your buffs. Not only that, but you're probably getting summoned from location to location, again, when you're on a PvP server, because you're trying to make sure that you're not getting dispelled or griefed by enemy players, which happens a lot. So the whole process of coordinating all of your buffs does take a little bit of time and energy and effort, and it can definitely wear and tear on you doing it every single week. Now, the drama associated with buffs happens in kind of one of 2 general scenarios. You lose your buffs to open world PvP, where a shaman or a priest from the enemy faction dispels your buffs prior to entering the raid, just for the lulz. And this happens a lot, and it is quite frustrating. You've spent hours trying to acquire these buffs, and then this happens. Trust me, I know. Or you might make it into the raid, and then maybe you die in the first couple of pulls because a fellow guildmate might make a silly decision. Now, of course, raid wipes happen, and especially when your guild is attempting to top their best clear time, or, people just make dumb mistakes. I've done it myself.
Yo, let them get threat. Jeez.
There's no world buff, so don't pull threat.
Now, when someone loses their buffs that they spent hours trying to get, and they die within the first 15 minutes of a raid, they can get pretty frustrated.
How did we not kill him quick enough? That's kind of annoying.
In fact, there's a running joke in my guild that the main tank has a number of headsets that have been broken after one particular incident where the audible noise of a headset being thrown across the room was heard through Discord after he lost his buffs in BWL.
I got BA, so.
Nice. Oh shit.
He died in Storm.
Alright, so let's go back to the original idea here. Are buffs even worth it in Classic WoW when they require so much time, gold, and effort to acquire?
New headset?
Oh shit, rest in peace, Konos.
Now I know that some of these opinions are going to be a little controversial, but hear me out. I would argue yes, for the most part. See, if you have the time, I think they make the raiding experience a bit more interesting. First of all, you see bigger numbers, which everybody loves. You have better parses, which everybody loves. And it makes the raid go quicker and easier if your whole raid is buffed and fully consumed. And on top of all of this, if you remember at the beginning of the video, a number of guildies said that it was too easy, they were not having fun, or it was generally boring. And that, of course, relates to their experience raiding in Classic WoW. Now, if you go out of your way to get these buffs and you go out of your way to fully consume, etc., although it's not necessarily required, and yes, it does require time, when you get into the raid, there's a whole added layer of mechanic that you have to pay attention to now. First and foremost, you're trying not to die because you put all this time and energy into getting buffs at the very beginning of the raid, which makes you pay extra attention to threat, aggro, and other mechanics during bosses. You care more about not dying. On the other hand, I know that many players that don't bother getting buffs anymore due to frustration of losing them multiple weeks in a row because of cross-faction griefing or dying early in a raid. So I understand the disdain towards getting the buffs, but if you're not having fun raiding, just walking into a raid and just doing the same thing over and over again, spice it up a little bit. Try to make it a little bit more entertaining for yourself by adding an additional layer of challenge or execution. You're changing the dynamics of your raiding experience. And I get that if you're just not one of those players that likes to go out of their way to prepare for a raid. I totally understand that, and it's not for everybody, you know, in their style of wanting to play the game. I get that, right? I'm just trying to argue that potentially there is a solution to many people's problem with being bored raiding in Classic WoW. So, all in all, with one raid left in the Classic experience, that is Naxxramas, which is coming out very soon. The amount of consumables needed will inevitably increase, and there is a new world buff to contest in Eastern Plaguelands, which involves open world PvP. And in the Burning Crusade, world buffs become obsolete. I will personally continue to go through the painstaking, time-consuming, oftentimes demoralizing process of trying to get fully buffed and consumed for the rest of Classic WoW in order to enjoy all of the aspects of the Classic WoW raiding experience. Hey, it just might be our last chance.
I think that last vendor shortchanged me. Oh, that was a bad one.
Thank you all so much for watching. Please like and subscribe if you'd like to see more videos like this. And also, feel free to comment below if you have an idea for a video you'd like to see in the future.